The day is April 19th, 1775. A lot has happened leading up to this point. The colonists in North America, especially in Massachusetts, have faced the Boston Massacre, unjust and unfair taxes, and they're getting to their breaking point against the British. Leading up to this date, Thomas Gage, who's in charge of the British Army in North America, has been sending British troops to different points, burning and getting rid of bands and getting rid of the stocks and stockpiles of weapons, so the militia cannot fight against the British. All of that will come to a head here where I stand, Lexington Green in Massachusetts, where John Parker and his militia are going to stay right out by that tavern, Buckman's Tavern, when the British come down the road after being signaled by Paul Revere and two other riders. And they will come out from the tavern, gather on this field. They will stand their ground as the British come up. No one knows who shot it. Those were British, most believe, because the shot was not fired by the colonists. They were fired upon, and they were killed, and then the rest of the militia retreated up to Concord. This would be known as Lexington Green, where they would be killed, the militia and the Minutemen. And what will happen on April 19th, 1775 will spark the American Revolution. And this was all done early in the day. Early. This is the day we find out about Paul Revere's ride. And we find out just what this country will be willing to do against a tyrannical government. It's not even a country yet, but everybody's starting to form their own line. The British will cross it today. And here we are, as I take you on for what is now going to be the 250th anniversary of that fateful day in America, April 19th, 1775. I have with me here a book I just recently read, recommended by Selena Baker, who recommended it. It's called American Spring, Lexington, Concord, and the Road to Revolution by Walter R. Borneman. I have to say this is a great book. So, an excerpt from this, it says about Lexington Green. By the time Pitcairn saw what was happening at the intersection, approximately half his force, some 100 men, had followed Adair along the northern edge of the green. Pitcairn frantically tried to recall them as his remaining companies turned left and followed the Concord road. To Parker and his men, the result was that the lightning sky silhouetted British troops appearing on both sides of the meeting house and advancing on their position. Given the morning light, it was difficult to see just how many soldiers were on the Bedford Road coming straight towards them. If the Lexington men were suddenly seized by fear of being surrounded, Pitcairn was also gripped by similar thoughts. This was because, in addition to the line of militia on the green, there were two knots of would-be spectators, perhaps 20 or so each, lurking in the wings. One group gathered near Buckman's Tavern and the adjacent stable on Pitcairn's right flank, and the other stood partially hidden behind the stone, but behind the home of Nathan Monroe along the Concord road on his left flank. Their purpose was uncertain, but to Pitcairn they appeared to be mostly male, armed, and threatening. Suddenly he thought it might be his command that was surrounded. It is certainly possible, as many reports have claimed, that it was Major Pitcairn who galloped across the line of British infantry that had turned off the Bedford Road and sped across the green behind the meeting house, facing across the green toward the assembled militia. It is also possible that this rider was Major Mitchell, still highly charged with the events of the previous night. Whoever it was, the officer yelled some sort of "lay down your arms, you damned rebels," and disperse. Elijah Sanderson recalled that there were perhaps as many as 5 mounted British officers in front of the British line, which seems to suggest that Mitchell and at least some of the officers from his patrol were at the forefront. Sanderson stepped into line, but he had sent his musket home the prior evening before his nighttime ride to Concord. He later wrote, "Reflecting, I was of no use. I stepped out again from the company and fell back about 30 feet as the regulars were coming in full career." Now, what happened on April 19th was that Thomas Gage has sent a force of British soldiers up to Concord through Lexington because he was told through spies and given information of whatnot and loyalists that in this area there were munitions, a munitions depot that needed to be surrendered or even just set alight and destroyed. So the British came up here. John Parker and his men were over here at the Buckman's Tavern. They came out here, met. John Parker told his men not to fire, but to retreat in a sense. And they made their way towards Lexington and made their way up that road to regroup with the men at Concord. But I have here in American Spring an excerpt from that book of what just transpired. Who fired the first shot on Lexington Green early on the morning of April 19th, 1775, has been debated ever since and likely will be forevermore. About the only thing both sides agree upon is the uncertainty of the moment. Paul Revere, still struggling with John Lowell to carry Hancock's trunk away from Buckman's Tavern, heard the first shot. Many years later, perhaps influenced by the reports, Revere would say that he both saw and heard a gun fired, which appeared to be a pistol. But in a disposition only a few days after the event, Revere specifically recalled that he had to turn his head to view the action. When one gun was fired, Revere then testified, "I heard the report, turned my head, and saw the smoke in front of the troops. They immediately gave a great shout, ran a few paces, and then the whole fired." When Revere turned around at the shot, he could not see the Lexington Militia. A building, probably Jonathan Harrington's house, blocked Revere's view of that part of the green closest to him. And Captain Parker, having already ordered our militia to disperse and not fire, testified that the regulars rushed furiously and fired without receiving any provocation therefore from us. John Robbins, who's in the militia's front rank, agreed that the company was dispersing. Timothy Smith of Lexington was near the green when he saw the regular troops fire on the Lexington company before the latter fired a gun. Smith, who was likely standing behind and to the right of the front of militia line, had started to run away when another volley was unleashed in his general direction. By the time Smith cautiously returned to the common, he saw 8 of the Lexington men who were killed and lay bleeding at a considerable distance from each other, suggesting they had been in fact dispersing. In the maze of leaden musket balls flying in all directions, it was remarkable that there were not more casualties. The black powder of the day was so dense, and so much of it had been discharged, that a thick veil of smoke settled on the green, and John Monroe recalled the smoke prevented our seeing anything but the heads of some of their horses. But he fired back nonetheless. After his first shot, he retreated some yards, and then loaded my gun a second time with 2 balls, and on firing at the British, the strength of the charge took off about a foot of my gun barrel. Ebenezer Monroe also fired again, recalling that as he did so, the balls flew so thick, I thought there was no chance for escape, and that I might as well fire my gun as stand still. At the end of it all, there were some dead. Jonas Parker, Jonathan Harrington, Isaac Muzzy, and John and Ebenezer Monroe's father, Robert, were found dead near the place where the militia line had formed. Harrington died almost on his own doorstep, which was just behind the militia line on the edge of the green. No one could say that he hadn't been defending his home. Samuel Hadley and John Brown died after they had limped off the green. Asiel Porter and Caleb Harrington were shot down on the other end of the common, near the meeting house. Porter had been taken prisoner earlier and was trying to escape. Harrington had been mining the powder cache at the meeting house with an eye toward blowing it up should the regulars attempt to seize it. Among the 9 wounded was Prince Esterbrook. The only casualties on the British side were 1 infantryman wounded in the leg and Major Pitcairn's horse, which was nicked in 2 places. Some, including Reverend Clark, will cite this as evidence that, far from firing first upon the King's troop, upon the most careful enquiry, it appears that very few of our people fired at all. So, the Americans, once fired upon, fired back in retaliation. And then they would retreat back to Concord, where the fighting was just about to begin.